The rain started the moment my contractions did. I remember the sound soft at first, like the sky hesitating to cry, just as I hesitated to admit what was happening inside me. I was 27, then married for 3 years, living in a small suburban home that wasn't really mine. It belonged to my husband's mother, a woman who had made sure I never forgot it. Even now, I can still smell the lavender air freshener she used in every hallway, a scent that pretended to be calm but made me anxious every time I breathed it in. She liked control of the air, the meals, the temperature, the people, especially me. I was the outsider she tolerated because her son, Nathan, insisted on marrying me. She said I wasn't the right kind of woman for their family, whatever that meant. I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't refined, and I didn't know how to serve tea properly. But Nathan loved me, or so I thought back then. That morning, I had just finished folding laundry when my belly tightened sharply. The pain was sudden and electric, forcing me to grip the edge of the table. My due date was still a week away, but I knew the baby was coming. I called out for Nathan, but he was already gone. His mother had sent him to pick up groceries. I remember sitting on the couch trying to steady my breathing as another wave hit. When my mother-in-law Ruth appeared in the doorway, her lips pursed as if she had smelled something unpleasant, I whispered, "It's time. I think I'm in labor." She didn't rush to my side. She didn't even blink. She simply sighed, crossed her arms, and said, "Well, I suppose you should have planned better. Nathan's not here." Her words cut through me sharper than the pain in my abdomen. I thought she was joking, but her expression didn't change. I begged her to drive me to the hospital, but she just shook her head. "You can wait," she said coldly. "My son isn't here to make decisions, and this is his house. You don't just start running off without his say-so." By the time Nathan returned, my water had broken. The living room carpet was soaked, and I was crying, trembling, holding onto the edge of the couch. He panicked and rushed me to the car, yelling at his mother as we left. I didn't hear what she said back. I was too busy trying to breathe through the pain, too busy whispering to my unborn child that everything would be okay. But it wasn't. Hours later, in the sterile white light of the hospital, I brought a baby girl into the world. Her name was Lila. She was tiny and perfect, with a faint birthmark on her left shoulder that looked like a crescent moon. I remember crying when they placed her on my chest, the warmth of her body against mine, making everything feel worth it. For a brief moment, I thought Ruth would soften when she saw her granddaughter. I was wrong. When Nathan brought her to visit that evening, Ruth stood in the corner of the hospital room looking at Lila as if she were something inconvenient. "She doesn't look like a walker," she said quietly. I froze, unsure if I'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "Our family has strong features," she continued. "High cheekbones, light eyes, fair hair. Your baby doesn't have any of those. It's curious." Nathan tried to laugh it off, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was the first crack in something I had thought unbreakable. When we returned home 2 days later, the house felt different. Colder. Ruth had moved some of my things. My books were packed in boxes, my clothes stacked near the guest room. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Making space for the baby." "You've cluttered up my son's home long enough." That night, as I nursed Lila, I overheard Ruth and Nathan arguing downstairs. Her voice was low but firm. "You're too young to be tied down with a child," she said. "And how do you even know that child is yours? You work long hours. Who knows what she's been up to?" I felt my world tilt. I waited for Nathan to defend me, to shut her down, to remind her that I was his wife, that this was his child. But he didn't. He said nothing. The next morning, he wouldn't look me in the eye, and by evening, Ruth walked into my room holding a small suitcase. You should leave, she said simply. For everyone's good. I thought she was insane. I just gave birth, I whispered. Where would I go? I can barely walk. Her face was carved in stone. That's not my problem. You can go stay with your mother or your friends, but you won't be staying under this roof. I looked at Nathan, who was standing behind her with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Say something, I begged. Please. He finally spoke, his voice quiet. Maybe it's best if you go for a while, he said, until things calm down. That was the moment my heart broke in a way that could never fully heal. Not when he said it, but when he avoided my gaze afterward, as if he couldn't stand to see the damage his words caused. I packed what little I could while holding Lila in my arms. My stitches ached, my body trembled, and I felt like I was walking through a nightmare. Ruth watched from the doorway, arms folded, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. You brought this on yourself, she said. Some women just aren't meant to be mothers. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my vision blurry. I remember stepping out into the rain again, the same rain that had started when my labor began. I took it as a sign, maybe from the universe, maybe from something greater, that this was the beginning of a storm that would change everything. I found shelter at a friend's small apartment across town. Her name was Grace, a nurse I had met during my prenatal checkups. She opened her door wide, her face pale with disbelief, as I stood there holding Lila, drenched and shaking. What happened? She whispered. I didn't even have the strength to explain. She just wrapped me in a blanket, took the baby from my arms, and let me cry until my voice was gone. The next few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and grief. Grace helped me recover, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't understand how a mother, even one like Ruth, could be so cruel. And worse, how a husband could be so weak. Nathan didn't call. Not once. No messages, no visits. It was as if Lila and I had never existed. I started to believe Ruth's words that maybe I wasn't enough, that maybe I didn't deserve love or family. But then one night, while rocking Lila to sleep, I looked into her tiny face and realized I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I would rebuild. I would prove that even the woman cast out in the rain could rise again. Grace encouraged me to apply for a job at the hospital, part-time administrative work. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. I would drop Lila off at the daycare nearby, and every time I looked back at her through the glass window, I reminded myself that everything I did now was for her. She became my reason, my strength, my anchor in the storm. A year passed. Then, too, I didn't hear from Nathan or Ruth. But sometimes I'd see Ruth's face on social media, attending charity events, smiling with that practiced warmth that fooled everyone. She loved appearing kind to the world while privately destroying lives. Then out of nowhere, I received a letter. It was from Nathan. He wanted to meet. I hesitated for days, unsure if I could face him again. But curiosity and a flicker of hope got the better of me. When we finally met at a quiet cafe near the old neighborhood, I barely recognized him. He looked thinner, older, worn down. I'm sorry, he said as soon as we sat. You were right about her. About everything. I didn't know what to say. He told me Ruth had been diagnosed with heart disease, that she was in and out of the hospital. She's alone, he said softly. I think she wants to see you. I laughed, though it came out more like a broken sigh. She wants to see me after what she did, after she threw me out on the day I gave birth. He looked down. I know, I can't undo that. But she's dying, and she says she has something to tell you. Something shifted inside me, then not forgiveness, but curiosity. What secret could she possibly be keeping that would make her want to see me now? I agreed to visit her, but not for her sake, for mine. I needed answers. When I walked back into that house, the house that once felt like a prison, the smell of lavender hit me again. Ruth was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, frail and pale, but her eyes were still sharp. She looked at me as if measuring whether I had come to gloat. "You came?" she said finally, her voice thin but steady. "I came for the truth," I replied. Her lips trembled. For the first time in all the years I'd known her, she looked afraid. "Then you'd better sit down," she whispered. "Because the truth might destroy everything you thought you knew about your daughter." I didn't sit down right away. I couldn't. The air in that room felt heavy, thick, with something I didn't yet understand. I stood there, clutching my purse, staring at Ruth, the woman who had once reduced me to nothing more than an inconvenience. And now, she was the one trembling before me. Her voice wavered as she spoke again. "You deserve to know," she said quietly. "Before I go." I pulled out a chair, the same wooden one she used to scold me from when I was younger and naive, and sat across from her. I didn't speak. I wanted her to struggle to feel every ounce of the discomfort she'd once forced upon me. Ruth's fingers fidgeted with the blanket on her lap. "When you first married Nathan," she began, "I thought you were after our money. You came from nothing, and I wasn't about to let you drag our family down." I felt the old anger rise again, but I stayed silent. So she continued, her tone raw. "I did what I thought was protecting him. I hired someone, a private investigator." I frowned. "For what?" "To follow you," she said, looking ashamed. "To prove you weren't who you said you were. I wanted to find dirt, anything that would make Nathan leave you." Her confession hit me like a slow-moving wave. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. And I asked, my voice sharp, "What did you find?" Her lips quivered. "Nothing. You were clean. But the investigator told me something else." She paused, looking away. "He told me that when you were born, your mother wasn't married, that your father's name on your birth certificate was false." I blinked. "That's ridiculous," I snapped. "My father raised me." She shook her head. "No, the man who raised you wasn't your biological father." My breath caught in my throat. "You're lying." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I were. Because that man, your real father, was my late husband's business partner." For a moment, the world tilted. My pulse roared in my ears. I tried to process her words, but they didn't make sense. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she whispered, "that you and Nathan share the same father." I froze. The silence between us was deafening. My brain screamed, trying to reject what I'd just heard. "That's not true," I finally said. "That's impossible." She closed her eyes, her frail hands trembling. "I didn't know when you married him. I swear I didn't. But when I found out, I panicked. That's why I made you leave. I couldn't let the truth come out. It would have destroyed everything. The family name, the company, Nathan's reputation." Her words began to fade into static as the room spun around me. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to deny every syllable that came out of her mouth, but something deep inside me, something instinctive, told me she wasn't lying. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping the hardwood. "You're sick," I said, my voice breaking. "You're saying this because you're dying, because you want to feel better about what you did." She didn't argue. She just looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Get a DNA test," she whispered. "It's the only way you'll believe me." I left the house without another word. Outside, the sun was setting, bleeding orange across the horizon, the same color as the sky the day I left that house years ago. My hands shook as I drove away, Lila's name echoing in my mind. My daughter. our daughter. That night, I sat in my car long after parking outside my apartment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to breathe. Every piece of my life, my marriage, my family, my identity, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. When I finally walked inside, Grace was feeding Lila dinner. She looked up and smiled, but the smile faded when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked. I couldn't speak. I just sank to the floor and sobbed. It took days before I could even bring myself to talk about it. When I finally did, Grace was silent for a long time. "You have to know for sure," she said finally. "You can't carry that kind of question inside you forever." She was right. A week later, I went to a clinic and arranged for a DNA test, first for myself, then for Lila, and finally for Nathan. It took every ounce of courage to call him, but when he answered, his voice was weary hollow. I told him about Ruth's claim. There was a long silence, and then he whispered, "I don't believe it, but I'll do the test." We met at the clinic 2 days later. Seeing him again after so long was surreal. He looked older, worn out, a shadow of the man I once loved. When the nurse handed us the swabs, our eyes met for a brief moment. Neither of us spoke, but everything we hadn't said over the years hung in the air. Anger, regret, heartbreak, and something like fear. The results took a week, the longest week of my life. Every night I'd wake up in a sweat, imagining the worst. And then, one afternoon, the envelope arrived. I held it in my trembling hands for what felt like hours before opening it. The words blurred as I read them, but the meaning hit me like a thunderclap. 9.9% probability of shared paternity between Nathan Walker and Emily Carter. I dropped the paper. My knees gave out. The room swam in and out of focus. Ruth had been telling the truth. Nathan and I were half-siblings. The horror of it sank in slowly, like poison. Every memory of our marriage, every kiss, every moment of intimacy, every fight, every promise suddenly felt grotesque. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted to claw my way out of my own skin. When I finally called Nathan, he didn't answer. Hours later, he showed up at my apartment, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It can't be true," he said, his voice breaking. "It just can't." I showed him the paper. He read it once, then twice, and collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. "She knew," he whispered. "All these years, she knew." "Yes," I said bitterly, and she let it happen. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. The rain started again outside, soft at first, then harder. It was as if the world was mourning with us. After a while, he looked up. "What about Lila?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "She's not yours." The test confirmed it. He exhaled sharply, the sound somewhere between relief and despair. "She's not yours," I repeated, tears streaming down my face. "But she's mine, and she's innocent." She didn't ask for any of this. Nathan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I want to do the right thing," he said, "whatever that is." I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him for his weakness, his silence, his complicity. But in that moment, looking at him broken, trembling, I realized he was just as much a victim of Ruth's lies as I was. 2 days later, Ruth passed away. She died quietly in her sleep, without asking for forgiveness, without leaving a letter, without explaining how long she'd known, or why she had stayed silent. Her funeral was small. I went not out of love, but to close the chapter. Nathan stood beside me, his eyes hollow. After the service, he handed me an envelope. "Her lawyer gave me this," he said. "It's addressed to you." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Ruth's handwriting shaky and uneven. "Emily, I'm sorry for what I took from you. I told myself I was protecting my son, but all I did was destroy you both. There's money set aside in my estate for Lila. She deserves a better life than the one I gave you. Use it to build something good. That's all I can offer now." I folded the letter carefully, my emotions tangled between fury and pity. It was too little too late. But one thing in her letter struck me. Build something good. In that moment, I made a silent promise. I would build something. Not for her, not for Nathan, but for Lila, and for the woman I had once been before the betrayal, before the lies. Months passed. Nathan left the city, unable to face the ghosts of what we'd discovered. I didn't stop him. I had my own life to rebuild. I used the money Ruth left not as an inheritance, but as restitution to open a small daycare center for single mothers. A place where women who had been cast out just like me could find support, comfort, and dignity. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window after putting Lila to bed and watch the rain. I'd think of that day, the day I was thrown out of a house that was never mine on the same day I gave life to someone new. And I realized something powerful. Ruth had tried to destroy me, but she had unknowingly freed me. Because in losing everything, I had found myself. Years passed, but the shadows of that revelation never fully left me. Some nights, when the house was quiet and Lila's soft breathing filled the dark, I would still wake up with that old ache, the kind that comes from wounds that never completely close. The pain didn't scream anymore. It whispered. But its voice was steady, always reminding me of what was taken and what I had to rebuild. By the time Lila turned 10, the daycare center had grown into something I could never have imagined. We called it Haven's Home, a place where women and their children could rest, heal, and start again. It wasn't just a business, it was a purpose born from ashes. Each woman who walked through our doors carried a story like mine: betrayal, abandonment, loss. Some had been left by husbands, others by family, others by the cruel economy of life. And every time I listened to them, I felt a strange sense of kinship, as if we were all daughters of the same wound, learning how to mother ourselves through the pain. Still, behind every smile I gave, there was a lingering fear. Not of Ruth anymore, but of the truth she left behind. I worried about the blood in my veins, the legacy of deceit and silence that might one day touch my daughter. I didn't tell Lila the full story. Not yet. I only told her that her father and I had loved each other once, and that sometimes love isn't enough to protect us from the damage others cause. But secrets have a way of resurfacing, especially the ones you try hardest to bury. It happened when Lila was 13. She had been working on a school project about family trees. I still remember her sitting at the dining table, her hair tied up in a messy bun, eyes bright with curiosity as she traced lines and names across the paper. "Mom," she asked suddenly, "why don't I have any pictures of Dad's side of the family?" I froze. The question was innocent, but my heart pounded. "They live far away," I said carefully. "We lost touch." She frowned. "But Grandma Grace says everyone has someone. Can't we just look them up?" That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone with a glass of wine and stared at the old documents I kept locked away in a drawer. The DNA results, Ruth's letter, the photographs from a life that no longer existed. For the first time in years, I wondered if I'd made a mistake keeping the truth from her. I told myself it was to protect her, but deep down, I knew I was protecting myself from the shame, the judgment, the horror of what had been done to us. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the contents chilled me to my bones. "Emily, I think we need to talk. It's about Lila. Please don't ignore this. N. Nathan." I hadn't heard from him in over a decade. I sat there staring at the letter, unsure whether to burn it or read it again. He didn't say much, but the words, "It's about Lila," kept echoing in my mind. Against my better judgment, I called the number he'd scribbled at the bottom. When he answered, his voice was rough older, but unmistakable. "Emily," he said softly. "Thank you for calling." "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "I just need to see you. Please, it's not what you think. It's important." Every instinct told me to hang up, but something in his tone, a mixture of desperation and guilt, made me agree. We met the next afternoon at a small park near the river. He looked different gray streaks in his hair, a cane by his side. Time had not been kind to him. He smiled sadly when he saw me. "You look well," he said. "I can't say the same for you," I replied. He nodded, accepting the blow. Then he handed me a small envelope. "I got a letter before my mother died," he said quietly. "She made someone promise to send it to me years later. I didn't open it until recently. It changes things, Emily. Everything." Inside was another handwritten letter, yellowed with age. It was from Ruth again. This one, though, was addressed to Nathan. "My son, I couldn't live with what I did. Emily isn't your sister. I lied. I thought I was saving you both, but I ruined everything. The investigator told me her father was a man who once worked with mine, not your father. I convinced myself otherwise because I couldn't bear the thought of losing control over you. Please, if you ever read this, forgive me and forgive her." I stared at the page in disbelief. "You're saying she lied?" Nathan nodded slowly. "She lied to keep us apart, to punish you, to make sure I never left her side." I felt dizzy. The ground shifted beneath me all over again. "So you're telling me everything, the years of shame, the divorce, the exile. It was all for nothing." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't know. I swear I didn't." The fury that surged through me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just anger. It was grief transformed into fire. I thought of all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, all the times I'd told Lila her father couldn't be in her life, all the dreams I'd buried because of that woman's lies. "She destroyed us," I whispered. "She destroyed everything." Nathan nodded. "I know, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't want his pity. I didn't even want his forgiveness. What I wanted, what I needed, was peace. That night, after putting Lila to bed, I sat by the window again and watched the rain fall. It always seemed to come when my life shifted, as if the sky refused to let me face change without tears. I thought about Ruth, her arrogance, her control, her fear, and how she'd poisoned everything she touched, even from beyond the grave. But I also thought about redemption, about what it really meant. 2 weeks later, I visited her grave. It was small, unassuming, tucked away beneath a sycamore tree. I stood there for a long time, unsure of what to say. "You took so much from me," I whispered finally. "But you won't take the rest. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I do." The wind rustled the branches overhead, scattering leaves across the grass. I took it as her only answer. When I turned to leave, Nathan was standing a few feet away. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, eyes tired, but softer than I remembered. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hatred when I saw him. Just a deep, aching sorrow for what could have been. He walked with me to my car. Before I got in, he said quietly, "If you ever want me to know her to know Lila, I'll be here. I don't expect anything more." I didn't answer. I simply nodded and drove away. It took me months to process that second truth, that our tragedy had been built on another lie. but strangely, knowing the full story didn't break me again. It healed something old, something raw. The shame, the confusion, the fear, they began to loosen their hold. Because in the end, I realized that none of it, not Ruth's cruelty, not Nathan's weakness, not the years of loss, could define who I had become. Lila and I had built our own family, one rooted in love, honesty, and resilience. I'd spent too many years trying to understand why people hurt each other, but maybe some questions don't have satisfying answers. Maybe the lesson isn't in the why, but in how we choose to survive afterward. One rainy evening, not long after, as Lila helped me close up the daycare, she looked up and asked Mom, "Do you ever regret the past?" I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes," I said, "but I also know that without the past, we wouldn't be who we are now." She tilted her head. "So you'd live it all again?" I thought for a long moment. "Maybe not all of it," I admitted, "but the parts that led me to you, every single one?" She smiled, and for the first time in years, I felt peace, real peace. The years that followed were quiet, not in the sense of emptiness, but in the way a storm finally goes still after tearing everything apart. There's a kind of silence that follows ruin, not peace exactly, but a place to breathe. I had lived long enough to recognize that kind of silence when it came. Lila grew up to be everything I wasn't allowed to be when I was her age: confident, compassionate, unafraid to speak her truth. Watching her walk across the stage at her high school graduation, I felt a pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. She didn't just carry my name, she carried my redemption. Every dream I'd once buried, she carried forward like a torch. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "We did it, Mom," she said, smiling through tears. "We made it. We did." But behind her joy, I could see the quiet question she never asked. She had long sensed there was more to our story than I'd told her. Children always do. They feel what we try to hide, the hesitation in our smiles, the shadow in our laughter. That evening, I sat her down at our kitchen table. The sun was setting, spilling soft gold across the countertops. I could hear cicadas humming outside, the sound of summer fading. "Leela," I said gently, "there's something I should have told you a long time ago." She listened without interrupting as I told her everything: the day of her birth, the night I was thrown out, the years that followed, and the twisted truth Ruth had left behind. I didn't spare myself from blame. I told her about my silence, my fear, my mistakes. When I finished, the room was so still, I could hear my own heartbeat. Lila's eyes were glassy but calm. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You went through all that," she said softly, "and still gave me love. That's all that matters." I cried then, not because I was sad, but because I realized she meant it. She didn't see me as a victim. She saw me as a survivor. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't about setting others free. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they stole. Ruth had taken my home, my husband, my sense of belonging, but she hadn't taken my capacity to love. That was mine always. Lila went off to college a few months later, studying social work. "I want to help women like you, Mom," she told me before leaving. "Women who get left behind but refuse to give up." I smiled through the tears and told her to go build her own kind of haven. When the house emptied, I thought the silence would swallow me. But instead, it comforted me. It was the sound of survival, of a chapter finally closing. I poured my energy into expanding the daycare, opening a second branch in another town. I began speaking at local community centers, sharing my story with other women, not to relive the pain, but to show them what comes after it. One afternoon, years later, I received a letter postmarked from another state. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Nathan's. My hands trembled as I opened it. Emily, I've thought about writing for a long time. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I found peace too. I've remarried. My wife knows everything. She helped me learn how to live again without shame. I hope you found the same. If you ever wish to see me, not as the man who failed you, but as someone who once loved you truly, I'll be here. Tell Lila that I think of her often. She saved me without knowing it. Nathan. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in a box with the others, the first one he'd written years ago. Ruth's final apology and the DNA report that once broke my world. I kept them not as reminders of pain, but as proof of survival. Every word, every wound, every betrayal had become a part of the story that shaped me. That night, as rain tapped softly against the window pane, I lit a candle by the old photo of me holding newborn Lila in the hospital. The one moment that still felt pure despite everything that came after. I whispered to the photograph, "We made it, sweetheart. Against all odds, we made it." The candle's flame flickered, reflected in the glass, and I thought about how life is just like that, fragile, bright, unpredictable, but still burning. When people ask me now about revenge, I tell them this. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in destruction, it's in living so well that your enemy's ghosts lose their power. Ruth's cruelty had forced me out into the cold, but in that exile, I discovered the strength to build a life far warmer than anything she'd ever known. And when people ask about forgiveness, I tell them it's not about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let it define you. Years later, when Lila had a daughter of her own, she called me from the hospital, her voice trembling with the same awe I once felt. "She's here, Mom," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." Hearing that name, Hope, made me laugh and cry all at once. It felt like life had come full circle, like the universe was quietly righting its wrongs. I packed a small bag and drove to the hospital through the pouring rain, the same kind that had fallen on the day my story began. When I held baby Hope in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around mine, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of peace I'd never known. She had her mother's eyes, the same soft light that had once guided me out of darkness. I whispered to her, "You are the proof that pain can end, that love can begin again." That night, as I watched Lila cradle her daughter, I thought about the generations of women before us, all the broken mothers, the silent daughters, the cruel matriarchs who ruled with fear. It ended here, with us. We were no longer trapped in their legacy of control and shame. We were free. If there's one thing my life has taught me, it's this: sometimes the greatest gift comes disguised as loss. When Ruth threw me out on the day I gave birth, she thought she was ending my life. But what she really did was set me on the path toward the woman I was meant to become. I built my own home, my own family, my own name, and I did it without her approval, without her power, without her walls. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been cast out, betrayed, or made to believe you're not enough, remember this. The house they threw you out of might not have been yours, but the life you build after will be entirely your own. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, then share it, not for me, but for every woman who's ever had to start over. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so we can keep telling stories of pain turned into power and endings that became beginnings. Because sometimes the storm that nearly drowned you was just the world washing you clean.